Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Reading into Culture podcast.
Hi.
My name's Zara,
Hey, I'm Chris.
and we are joined today by Nick. Hello, Nick. How are you today?
Hi, I'm good, thanks, guys. It's good to be here.
Would you like to start by introducing yourself to everyone?
Sure. My name's Nick Crowley. I'm an Australian writer and social worker. Um, I write predominantly poetry, but recently I've been getting more into writing nonfiction and kind of like op-eds and hit pieces and things like that. And this work I'm going to be talking about today is, yeah, a little essay I wrote. Um, and yeah, I love poetry. I love I love theory as well. I guess like philosophy, social theory. Um, that's what I did my undergrad in that kind of stuff, and then it was something I fell in love with, but then fell in love with poetry and other things. But I've sort of recently been coming back to philosophy as a really important part of the way I look at the world, and that's kind of reflected in this piece. And I'm also really interested in like I work in mental health and disability, so I'm kind of interested in the intersection of um, suffering and the way we get tangled up in our minds, and how um, literature can comment on that and that intersection. The practice of working in mental health and practice of writing and theorizing, and how those two things go together is something that I'm really interested in. And I think that kind of comes from the piece that I've written in some ways. Yeah.
Oh, that's so fascinating.
Yes.
That's so cool that you kind of combine the literature and then also the language as expression and mental health. That's really cool. And I also I feel very I relate to you a lot because I feel like also poetry and philosophy are my big interests. So that's very cool to see.
It's only right up our
Mm-hmm.
street. Kind of a theory-heavy approach. That's a great introduction. Would you mind to tell us a little bit about this piece then?
Sure. I have a very clear memory actually of where this piece came from. I was walking home from the supermarket, and I just suddenly came over me this this like I was kind of almost a little bit angry as I wrote it, but this whole I had this really strong feeling that there was some kind of almost injustice in the way that I had been approaching reading, and especially reading nonfiction. Um, and yeah, and then this kind of thunderbolt of like almost this responsibility to save the practice of reading, or this sense that something was being lost in the practice of reading, and it was being reduced to this idea of assimilating information, which is not an idea that I've come up with. I think, as in the essay, like I've referenced the work of Deleuze and Guattari a lot. Yeah, I just kind of had this very like impassioned moment of feeling quite defensive about reading, and about kind of almost wanting to save it from this practice of just assimilating information, or this practice of reading for entertainment. I think I felt like, and partially that kind of panic almost was directed at myself, because I was noticing that I was kind of like treating books like using them almost like, like, okay, I want to stock up my knowledge on this, so I'm going to power through books. Yeah, it almost felt like disrespectful. They were coming from this mindset of instrumentalizing reading, and so this kind of came from this place of wanting to like clarify to myself that yes, reading can be a way of transmitting information. It can be entertainment, and it's not necessarily a bad thing that it is those two things, or can be those two things. But I think it's really vitally important that we remember that reading is, it's not to sound tacky, but like a communion of souls. You know what I mean? It's for me, writing is this desperate. Yeah, that sounds kind of desperate to say, but it is desperate. This desperate attempt to translate my inner richness um, into something that someone else could see, and it's kind of a form of communication and a form of having a relationship with someone is what I'm kind of trying to do with my writing, is relate, not transmit information, not entertain, but be like connected with other people. And so in turn I kind of, the most rich experiences of reading that I've had, especially reading philosophy and poetry, is those experiences where I feel like I'm connecting with someone. And sure, I'm assimilating information, I'm getting insights into things, I'm enjoying myself. Like that informational aspect and that entertainment aspect can be there too. But I think the kind of magic of it comes from like, I'm almost like getting my hands and eyes and ears and brain up in the intricacies of someone else's soul or someone's personality, or it's very intimate, the intimacy of reading. I kind of wanted to defend that. I felt sort of protective over it. And I think that's where this comes from. And I think part of it, I was also reading Difference and Repetition by Gilles Deleuze at the time. Like that was a book I was reading at the time. And I really felt the spirit of him as a philosopher. And Guattari too. And I felt that I felt through the connection I was having with those books kind of reminded me of, or drew me to the importance of having that more connected relationship with books, which is something they kind of advocate as well. Yeah, so that's kind of where it's coming from.
That's so fascinating. I think it makes so much sense that you're primarily a poet, as you said, because obviously this is a nonfiction piece, but it is kind of a very poetic, or maybe not poetic, but an approach that is usually used in poetry, this kind of just soaking up this experience rather than trying to get some sort of knowledge out of it. So you kind of wanting to approach other reading and philosophy and nonfiction or fiction that way, that's very fascinating. But before we get more into the discussion about this piece, would you like to read it out for us?
Sure, I'll do my best. I'll try to have a sexy reading voice. No, I'm actually not going to try to do that. It's a bad idea. The book food. A manifesto on reading by Nick Crowley, by me. In 1,000 Plateaus, Gilles Deleuze and Felix Guattari write that a book is a little machine. Reading, in turn, is a matter of plugging oneself into this machine, the book machine. For Deleuze and Guattari, a book is not a representation of reality. It is a flow of symbols and effects, and when you read, you are plugging your body into that flow. In one way or another, you get jacked up on that flow, in the same way you might get jacked up on anything you ingest. Deleuze and Guattari declare, we will never ask what a book means. We will ask what it functions with, in connection with what other things it does or does not transmit intensities. A book is not a grid that you superimpose on reality in order to understand it, as if our eyes were blurry and a good text were a necessary prescription lens. Rather, a book is something you eat and metabolize, and like any food, the way it affects us is a much more pertinent question than what it means. For Deleuze and Guattari, a book is something in the world before it is something about the world. They quote, what a vapid idea, the book as an image of the world. We pick up a book, we live in a world, and sometimes we pick up books and read them. And when we do this, we experience a movement of ideas, a passage of effect in our bodies. A book happens to us. Of course, a book can stay with us beyond the event of being read, but we ought to think of the way a text stays with us as akin to the way something we eat stays with us. It is metabolized, it strengthens us, modulates us, strangles us, changes us, but it does not necessarily change us by giving us a better grasp on the world. Reading is not a break we take from the world in order to sharpen our thoughts, such that we can return to it with finer representational nets. A book happens. This desire for representational knowledge of reality, the desire to bulk up on books and know more stuff, is often subtended by guilt and a sense of deficit. We say to ourselves, I do not know enough. I am mystified. I need to add height to my trembling tower of knowledge. Deleuze and Guattari's machinic reading provides a nice corrective to us guilty readers, to us who want to bag life in our knowledge nets and soothe our epistemic deficit. Where the guilty reader proceeds from a sense of lack, the machinic reader proceeds from a positive desire to be innovated and transformed. Where the guilty reader wants to weave finer meshes with which to catch the world, our machinic reader says, beware, these meshes inevitably become so tight that they turn into walls. The machinic reader wants to be broken down. They want to be fatigued, shot through, delighted. They read in pursuit of events that are strictly unthinkable, although they might delight in the poetry of trying to think them nonetheless. They read in search of events that are immediately there. They read in search of an enlightenment that disappears as soon as they shut the cover. The guilty reader, of course, knows these revelations. They feel them and want them and fear that they will have not had enough of them. They tend to treat these moments of revelation as rare portals into a true picture of the world. And when the revelation strikes, a miserly fear is never far behind, as they worry they might lose the sacred moment of insight. And so they try to capture it, summarize it, generalize it, preach about it, and stitch it into their representational account of the world, stitch it into their personalities. And so before the moment can be savored and enjoyed, they are already trying to preserve it. Conversely, for the machinic reader, it is enough to have had these moments of enlightenment. To the guilty reader, they say, let the insight go. Other moments will come. There are more than enough good books to keep you jacked up for a lifetime. In fact, the machinic reader values these transcendental moments in direct proportion to their mutability. They live by the dictum that a perception, a memory, a supposition is enhanced rather than diminished by its being inexplicable to others. This quote from The Plains by Gerard Manane is the perfect slogan for this anti-representational manifesto. This manifesto is not an argument against truth. This is not an argument against memory. This is not an attempt to deepen our already acute historical amnesia. Go read history, pass down traditions, remember important facts, believe in good science, value good theory. Representations can be useful. Some of them might even be true. We are not against the keepers of wisdom. We are just worried about guilty readers who are unwittingly burying the experiential body under a thick crust of representational netting. We are not seeking the abolition of knowledge, nor are we denying the possibility or utility of representations. We are simply memorializing that part of the text that can only be viewed, that vital thing in the text that exists in excess of any representational relation it might have to the world around it. We are valorizing the reciprocal flow between our bodily flesh and the flesh of the book. We are reminding the reading public of something we feel we are losing: the event of the written word, the gustation of the written word, the nourishment of the written word. With the rise of AI, language is increasingly reduced to a mere medium for the transmission of information, and we are forgetting its primordial scene, the meeting through symbols with the intimacy of another being. Writing can be information, but it is not only information. We must remember that it is also this thing I do where I try to send the richness in me into the richness in you. Language as gift, writing as reaching, reading as a welcoming of the other rather than the consumption of digestible parcels of information. Reading as an encounter through the distance of the text with a feeling, moving foreign friend. When we treat language as representational information, we reduce it to something that can be totalized and assimilated into the self and its view of the world. The text is dissolved into the subject's representational account of the world, and so there is no room for the other. There is no room for their strangeness. There is no room for their affect. There is no room for their dance. Speaking less philosophically, we are commending stories that plug nicely into our sockets. We are adventurers in the field of words. We are cosmic cowgirls who ride books like horses, who read books in search of crystals of fugitive clarity, who read books as if we were going to a gallery, walking through, taking it all in, walking out, going back home and feeling changed in ways that are wholly imprecise. Then we dive into the next thing, a plate, a social encounter, a park, lamplight, the wind. You see, a book is a thing amongst things. It is something to do. It is a place to go. It is something to see. Above all else, it is something to eat.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Oh.
Such a great essay. I really, really love it.
Oh.
I think I would start our discussion by asking you, what kind of book are you referring to? Because even earlier, before you read it, I said something like nonfiction or even fiction, you know. And hearing you read this again, I was wondering, there's some places where you hint at kind of nonfiction, you know, kind of reading about knowledge, something that describes the world. But in a lot of ways, fiction also describes the world. And I've certainly caught myself saying things like, you know, literature is a kind of is a way for me to understand the world and people around me. So what kind of book are you imagining when you say books are food?
That's a good question. Well, I guess there's two things. Before I answer that question, I guess you touched on something interesting, because I guess I'm advocating here as a reader to read as if there is a kind of person in the book or a soul in the book that you can commune with. But I think for that to happen, the book has to be written in a way where that soul is there. And I think a lot of nonfiction these days written in this very formulaic way, where the objective is almost to take that personal relation out of it and make it digestible. You know what I mean? So I think it's an equal responsibility here. I think, and I'm not going to name any books in particular, but there's this certain genre of, I guess, like digestible nonfiction, where it's edited and formatted in a very formulaic way, where even if you try and show up as a reader to be present with the relationship, that the author hasn't showed up, or the author's been buried beneath the editorial practices. But I guess, so to answer your question though, I guess what I'm thinking about it is kind of classical philosophical texts in a way, and also non-classical philosophical texts as well, but the texts that are kind of, one, not formally innovative in the sense that they're not following a kind of script of how you format your ideas. It's almost like the book itself is a demonstration of the person wrestling with the problem. So I think like a lot of these kind of classic philosophical texts, like Deleuze and Guattari, or phenomenological stuff, or even something like Judith Butler, it's like you're not witnessing a prearranged product of ideas. Of like, okay, here are the ideas that I've got. I figured it out, and I'm going to present it to you in a digestible way. What makes those books brilliant is the demonstration of a style of thought, kind of like a performance. It's like, what's rich about them isn't the fact that they've come to a certain conclusion that's airtight and undoubtedly correct. Why I think those books are so resonant, beyond being, just bullshit canonization within the academy, but the ones that at least I like, it's because yes, there's an idea, maybe there's a conclusion, but at a deeper level, you're kind of seeing at a very intimate level the way this person is wrestling with the problem. You're kind of seeing them stylize their thinking. You're seeing they're kind of taking you with the journey of how they're kind of getting from A to B, how they're wrestling with the problem. It's not a prepackaged, digestible parcel of ideas and information and conclusions. It's like it's more artistic. I think it's like it's a dance, or you kind of commune with them because you feel the style of their writing. You know what I mean? Like someone like Deleuze and Guattari, especially, like they've got such a particular style, such a tone, such like a swagger to the way they write. And I think it's the same with any kind of good book that I think is good, book that I connect with. It's kind of like you're witnessing them dance, you're watching them walk, you're watching like the style of their thought. You know what I mean? And there's a kind of authenticity in it. Authenticity in the sense that they're kind of, there's something inimitably that person about them, and that's that thing I'm talking about in the essay of I feel as though I'm connecting with that unique person. You know what I mean? Through the texture of their language, rather than just getting a nice parcel of information.
Totally. I think it's so striking you use the word digestible there, that some books are digestible.
Like food?
Yeah, that makes me really, and there's things like Reader's Digest, that really makes me realize that that's actually quite a common idea, the book as a kind of a meal or food. Like, you don't notice that, but that is actually like, I don't know if you deliberately use the word digest there, but that's so striking. That's really opened my eyes to how much we think about books as as food, even in it's not that much of a jump, this metaphor at all.
Yeah, I about what you said as well, I feel like it's kind of it's about showing up with a certain level of generosity as well, almost like when kind of your friend is talking and working through an idea, they kind of often don't have to present it in a perfect way. It's just kind of interesting to see their mind at work, and I feel that way too when I read philosophy. It seems to me like some people just have a kind of natural predisposition to think in a certain way, to see the world in a certain way, and it's kind of very evident in the way that they speak, even if they haven't deliberately chosen those words at every turn. And to kind of show up as a reader and to as I said, with generosity, and not see it as a set idea by a genius thinker, but just a person who's kind of trying to communicate something. I think that's a really beautiful idea.
Yeah, and it's even I feel like communication is part of it, but I almost really see it like as a performance. You know what I mean? Like the books that I really connect with, and like you said before, it's not just I think it almost kind of goes without saying that this is the case for fiction and poetry. Like it almost feels like the correct metaphor is almost dance or like music. It's kind of like the witnessing of the movement of the language. While there's communication and there's a transmission of information, it's almost like the thing that really makes me see the person is the way they move. You know what I mean? In the same way with a friend, it's like, when they say something, like a really good friend, and they say something and it's just like, oh my God, that's just such a you thing to say. And it's not usually the thing they've said or the particular content of the idea they're expressing. It's something more ineffable about the style of saying it and the context in which they're saying it. And there's just something, trademark them in the that kind of linguistic performance that they've just given, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
Makes a lot of sense. I think that's maybe something I wanna kind of push on in this conversation. Is on the one hand, in this essay, there's an idea of the book as something non-representational, as we should focus on it as symbols, kind of in and of themselves, as a kind of as non-representational, or doesn't represent anything. But on the other hand, that this idea that it is an other, that it is a soul that we communicate with, and I feel like that's kind of an interesting tension there, because does it represent the soul? Because it isn't, or is it the soul? Or I don't how can it be both not representational and also represent the soul? Would I guess be my question, or is that am I totally barking up the wrong tree here?
No, that's I mean, that's a great question. I'm not sure if I have an answer, but yeah, I think there's the paradox embedded in this idea of being anti-representational, or not even anti-representational, but trying to approach language as non-representational, because as you've just said, it's like at some level it's kind of inescapable. Even by saying that, I'm communicating, by engaging with this text, for example, say it's a poem or a short story or whatever, and I'm saying, well, I'm not engaging with this representationally. I'm just kind of communing with this author's soul. But it's like, well, in some way, that text stands in for the author's soul. I'm not actually communing with the author because the author's not there. I don't know the author. So I get what you're saying. Like, in some way, that text has got to stand in for the author's soul, which you could say is a representation of the author's soul. But I suppose when you say, at least in my understanding of the Deleuzean idea of being anti-representational, it's more in the sense of this idea that it's kind of taking issue with the implicit ontology of representation, where when you kind of say, say I make a sentence like, all cows are green, for example. Okay, let's say something that's true, like grass is green. Which is, we'd all agree on that, right? But implicitly, what you're saying about language there is there is a world, there's a material reality, spiritual reality, psychological reality, whatever. There's a reality, there's a world, And then you've got this other thing called language, which implicitly it kind of seems you're kind of separating that out and making that about the world, and saying that language can kind of step aside from reality and kind of map it. And language can kind of have this homology with the world, if that makes sense. And implicit there, even though you might not actually believe that, implicit in that idea of representation is this dualism, is this splitting of language onto another plane, almost hovering above reality. And then we kind of say, well, you know, this can either mirror this correctly or incorrectly. You know what I mean? When I say that grass is green, we're kind of, and we say that's true, we're kind of saying, well, this system of symbols that we're kind of hovering up here is kind of an accurate reproduction of the world. And I guess that's the kind of thing where the anti-representational thing is kind of saying this is not true, that language is in the world, it's a part of the world, and then it interacts with the world. It's, you know, they're all kind of sitting together in a big hodgepodge, so to speak.
Yeah.
There aren't these two planes. But again, it kind of, it still doesn't, there's still that tension, because it's like, well, obviously we kind of can represent things. Like, you know, when I say the grass is green, it's sort of like, no matter how many philosophical gymnastics you do, it's kind of like, well, yeah, I kind of get what you mean. That's very reasonable. So there's a question of if we don't believe in this kind of, if we're rejecting this idea that language hovers above the world and sort of describes it with more or less accuracy, and we agree that there's not that kind of duality, there's not these two planes, there's only one plane in which all things are kind of interacting, we need, how does representation possible? Because it obviously is possible in some sense, and I don't think I have an answer for that. Maybe you guys do.
No, I certainly don't. But I do think that's very true. It's like how I agree, and I think that's kind of at least what I see, the kind of fundamental job of poetry is to kind of have a non-representational relationship with language. But then it is obviously representational. Like there is a function of language, and even if you try to escape it, there is a certain, like as you say, the poem stands in for this, the text stands in for this. There's always a kind of, I don't know, I guess maybe there's something like the book stands in for the soul, but not, there's no, the words don't map the soul. I don't know, that's really interesting.
Yeah, I find that a very, very interesting kind of, you know, pressure point of this essay, that you know, it is very, you say this manifesto is not an argument against truth, and it's almost like it's very deliberately not, you know, anti-science, anti-truth, because you could kind of have it in this essay, and then someone's biggest question would be, well, there is such a thing as this is true and this is not true, and you know, you say like believe in good science, value good theory, representations can be useful, and I find that very interesting, because I feel like it is often this is often a thing that is left out, you know, of this discussion. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that, about how you can at once have the understanding that there is no representation, and you know that there is, how do I phrase this, that there are no two planes, like you said, but there are still things that are true, and that is very, very important, especially in our kind of culture and our times, to say that science is often true, even if that's kind of a very problematic thing to say if you're kind of you have like this kind of approach to language, if that makes any sense.
No, that's a great question. I think when I'm saying, I didn't really explicate this in the essay, but when I'm kind of having this tirade against representationalism, or this tirade of treating books as information, I'm not so much like trying to engage in the very dense philosophical terrain of like what relationship there is between language and reality. I find that very interesting, but I don't think I'm qualified to have an opinion on that. I'm more talking about the motivation. I'm more interested in I'm not kind of saying representation is bad. What I'm more pointing toward is a certain mindset or motivation or kind of emotional impetus that is behind this desire for representational knowledge. So, for example, you could be someone who really cares about a particular issue, like say climate change, and you're a scientist and you're doing science on trying to understand the impacts of climate change on certain areas, for example. And so your motivation there is perhaps a deep love and concern for the natural environment and for the animals and people that live in that natural environment. And so you want to create a picture of the world that will enable you to intervene in a good way, right? And so I'm like, hell yeah, like go do that. When I'm kind of anti-representational, I'm more pointing toward maybe kind of a psychological complex where the otherness of the world, being confronted by things that you don't understand, or things that make you feel uncomfortable because they're strange. So that often creates anxiety in people, right? When there are things we don't understand or things that are unknown. And then I think there becomes this desire to kind of capture things in a representational net in order to soothe our anxiety about that. You know what I mean? And I think that's the thing I'm kind of pointing to. There's this desire to kind of, I guess the word would be totalize, is to kind of take your own view of the world in which, everything, you have these categories in your head through which you sort out reality. And then something new comes along which disturbs that reality, and then you try to almost like create these modifications to your account of the world. So you can kind of bring that thing in and make it sit within your existing account of the world. But in the process of doing that, I don't think you actually truly know that thing. You're not doing truth. I don't think you're representing it accurately. What you're doing is distorting that thing in order to make it fit with your existing worldview. So I think that's what I mean. I think that's the kind of thing where representation can become dangerous, is when it's not really actually about truth, but it's about assimilation. Or I think so there can be that anxiety-driven part of it, or what I talk about in the essay is guilt. This kind of, and you see it amongst like writers and kind of intellectual types, especially amongst people you'd see in philosophy, departments, this sense of like, I don't know enough. There's something that I need to have an opinion on. And again, it comes into this type of totalizing. There's this region of reality that is other, is strange, is unknown. And then there's this desire to kind of bring it in, you know what I mean? To capture it in a net so that, okay, I've got the coordinates, I know how to place this. And that's the thing. I think the thing here, that's got nothing to do with truth. I think to really know something that is different and other, it's not about kind of trying to fit it within your existing representational net, or to kind of modify your representational net, or kind of fine tune it in order to kind of be able to assimilate it, but to sit with the otherness of that thing. If you should read, it's a great book called The Expulsion of the Other by Byung-Chul Han, that talks about this a lot, this idea that you become increasingly uncomfortable with just otherness of something that's just not, we're losing that capacity to sit with something. This is strange, this is uncomfortable, this is different, but I'm not going to try and totalize it and assimilate it and try and understand it within my existing worldview. I'm going to kind of suspend that and sit with it and kind of just be there with it, which I think can create a knowledge of it, but not a net representational knowledge, but this kind of knowledge that comes through the relationship. You know what I mean? Which is good, kind of comes back to the reading of this relationship with books, not as giving you information or giving you entertainment, but as just sitting with something other and then having a relationship with. You know what I mean? Like if you're falling in love with someone, you're not going to be like, well, I know what you are. Like, oh yeah, I've got your type, I've got your thing. I know who you are. You might fall in love, but I think that's a bad way to go. When you really fall in love with someone, you kind of fall in love with the strangeness of them, and it's kind of this magical process of kind of coming to know them and being confounded. And there's a kind of I don't want to use the word exotic because of the racist connotations, but there's something like, whoa, like who is this person? Like they're unlike anyone I've ever met, and they're amazing and they're strange, and build that relationship with them, they change you, and it's beautiful. So yeah, I think that's the kind of reading. But yeah, so again, go back to the question. It's about the motivation. I think representation can come from that place. Doesn't have to come from that place of guilt or anxiety about the unknown, but I think often it does. Yeah.
I totally agree with that. I think, like, on one level, there's the kind of basic linguistic representation of the grass is green, which is a thing, but it's more about the kind of larger representation of the kind of psychoanalytic or Marxist or kind of these big 19th century ideologies that try to totalize the world, where it's not just that the grass is green, it's that, you know, everything is a representation of an Oedipal complex or of a class struggle, or, you know, there's thousands of these kind of ideas, these kind of totalizing ideologies where every aspect of reality becomes a representation of some idea. I guess maybe that's more what it's about. I don't know. More what's meant by representation here. Strikes me, at least.
I thought all of that was really, really well said. Everything you said earlier, and I can totally understand everything you were expressing, I think, and I really get that, and the phrase "the guilty reader" is really striking, I think, and in your introduction you said that this essay came from a kind of anger, and that you kind of felt yourself being this guilty reader, and that definitely, I think, comes across in the essay as well, that you're not necessarily saying you people are approaching literature wrong or philosophy wrong, but also this frustration with yourself. And I wanted to ask you kind of about that process of moving towards this machinic reading, and you know, do you feel like you've managed to do that? Do you feel like you have been able to kind of honor the books, be more respectful towards the books, and not just power through them? And what does that kind of look like?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think even though I've written this essay as like a hit piece on this imagined you, it very much is an internal dialogue I'm having with different parts of myself, 100%. And sure, I don't think I've sort of mastered it. No, like, I guess it comes from this place within myself where there's it's almost like there are so many books in the world, and it just feels like I'm missing out on something having not read them. At one level, that's it.
I get that.
But that's probably, there's something deeper going on where it's almost like, if I self-analyze myself, I think it's kind of a displacement just of a sense of inadequacy, really. I think there's this, the emotional feeling of that guilty reader thing is this thing of like, like, I really want to read that book and know about that, because, you know, there's something missing from me if I don't do it. You know what I mean? There's something incomplete within within myself if I don't do that. Or maybe at a more ego level, what I'm thinking is, you know, I'm an intellectual person. You know, I've got degrees. I am politically engaged. You know, I have this image of myself as a smart, well-read, intellectual person, and so then it's kind of like, when a book comes up, when you know, someone tells you about a book you haven't read that sounds important, it kind of threatens that image of yourself, and so then there's this guilt, there's this panic, but then you've got to ask, like, so there's that emotional dynamic of coming out of, you feel inadequate, basically, or you've got this image of yourself that you're constantly trying to catch up with, which you know, comes from deeper things, I think, of just a sense of not being enough. You know what I mean? I think it's a displacement of something much more emotionally primitive, if that makes sense. And it comes from a sense of needing to, well, again, it's kind of this thing of like, you need to prove yourself, or you need to kind of construct a kind of resume of like, this is who I am, and therefore I'm worth something. Whereas when you're in that mindset, when you kind of, forgetting books here for a moment, but if you have the kind of personality type or a kind of trauma profile where it's kind of like you don't think that you can just relate to people as yourself, as you are, and connect with them and that be fulfilling, but you're almost trying to prove yourself in relationships, then you're never really going to be able to have a naked, raw relationship with someone. Rather, you'll be having a relationship with someone where you're trying to prove something to them. You're trying to say all these things to get reflected back to you, an image of how you want to be, basically. Which kind of mirrors the thing with reading. I think when you're in the guilty reader mode, when you're in that mode of reading that derives from a sense of inadequacy and a sense of needing to, provide a resume for your personality, you're not having a connection with the book. You're trying to read the book and then get it under your belt and put it on a notch in your belt so you can kind of reinforce the image of yourself as whatever you're trying to reinforce, as smart, as intellectual, as well-read. Whereas if you've kind of brought healing to that part of yourself and you can be like, well, I'm just some smelly dude and that's all right, and I'm just going to read this book, then you can have a relationship with it because you're not using the book as a thing to assimilate and kind of say you've read it and have all the hot takes in your head so you can kind of reinforce an ego ideal. You're approaching it as yourself, and then you're able to have a relationship with it, which I think mirrors, that's just a mirror of how you would approach social relationships as well. Are you approaching a relationship with someone from the sense of deficit and therefore needing to prove something to them so that you can then prove something to yourself? Or are you just approaching the relationship as an opportunity to connect, and with all the risk that entails and with all the kind of unpredictability that entails, but also all the vitality and fun and craziness and sexiness that entails.
Yeah, it's like almost like a selfish approach to reading and then also to relationships, to only think about what can I get out of something rather than how can this be kind of an equal giving and taking, and an actual genuine connection with something.
Absolutely, I absolutely agree. And it's like, I guess, to come back to this idea of the book is kind of the other. It's an unknown thing, and you can read it either with an attempt to kind of integrate that other, to kind of master that other, to kind of, okay, I want to know about this, so I'm going to know about it, and then I've read that, and then I can say that I've read that, and I can be really proud, and I can put it on my Goodreads, and I can say that I've read 100 books this year and everything. Or you can read it with more of an approach to kind of, to live with the other, to allow the other to exist alongside you and to not be threatened by it. And I guess that's the kind of, I don't know, that's maybe how I see the decision about how to read a book. I don't know if that resonates.
I want to say as well that I think the art gallery metaphor that you use, who read books as if we were going to a gallery, walking through, taking it all in, walking out, going back home and feeling changed in ways that are wholly imprecise. I think that's a really, really great metaphor that I'm really going to take with me, because it's interesting kind of to compare one art form to a different art form. And it is often, writing does have, it's the huge plus, but also the baggage almost of having words, of having this very unique kind of immediate ability to be interpreted. And sometimes that is actually a hindrance, that it can be interpreted, if that makes sense. I mean, art can also be interpreted, but it is a little bit more indirect. And usually people don't go to an art gallery and then just look at a painting and think, what does it mean? What does it mean? What does it mean? What is it trying to tell me? It is not usually the relationship people have with that art form. And so to kind of borrow that from into writing, is very difficult, but I think it's a very beautiful way to approach it. It reminds me as well of Against Interpretation by Susan Sontag, where she argues as well kind of a very similar thing of just experiencing art rather than trying to figure out what it means, and then it actually does a disservice to the art form. And it seems like you're saying something very similar there, that maybe interpretation is very, yeah, you know, disrespectful, as you called it earlier, almost to the piece. It's not a question, but it's just just kind of echoed back to you what I'm taking from this.
Well, I agree. I think what's interesting, you use the word interpretation, because I think that can be very flattering or very disrespectful depending on the way we use that idea of interpretation. I think if we go to the other side, we've been talking about like readers, you know, this idea that readers should be kind of generous to the otherness of the text, not try to assimilate it. I think on the other side, like, you have an increasing amount of books that you can't even interpret because they're already so, there's no interpretation to be done because they've been made so digestible. You know what I mean? They've pandered so much to the kind of, I don't know, I guess you could say, you know, the objective of a lot of these kind of nonfiction books is to not require interpretation, is to be able to be like read and digested and, you know, to appeal to a popular audience, you know what I mean? Which, don't get me wrong, I think it's a great thing to appeal, to not be obscurantist or elitist, and to try and, you know, make your writing digestible to some extent. But I think there's something, if you're approaching a text and you have to interpret it, it already implies that there's some resistance there, that you're not fully, the text doesn't already seamlessly just fit into your existing representational apparatus, which I think a lot of that nonfiction is trying to do that. It's trying to be like, let's not put anything that will grate or cause fiction or make the person stop and reread the sentence again. It's got to like be seamlessly fit into the existing representational apparatus. But I think interpretation happens when there isn't that seamlessness. When you read, like, poetry is a great example. Like, you never, well, me personally, very rarely can I read a poem once and sort of get anything from it. It always demands some kind of interpretive work. And so I think it's kind of a sign of a text authenticity, maybe, or its refusal to be totalized within a kind of collective imaginary when it does require interpretation. But that being said, you know, then when a text comes into, so if the text is doing that, I'm kind of like, okay, this is cool. But then I think what we often do when then a text kind of demands interpretation is we try and totalize it. Or we go like, oh, you know, that's just saying this. This is just another version of, you know, something we've already, you know what I mean? Like a text that's, say, for example, a novel that's using language that's kind of fragmented and breaking the conventions of prose would be like, oh, that's stream of consciousness. You know what I mean? We can fit that into an existing kind of framework. When, I mean, maybe in a stream of consciousness, but that's not to say that it's doing the same thing as James Joyce, you know, a modern author who would do that. There might be something very different and unique and particular about that thing that demands interpretation. But often our interpretations are aimed at assimilating it into our existing representational system rather than welcoming that thing in to maybe confound our existing representational system, which I think I'm not very good at. I think I immediately, especially with difficult, quote unquote, difficult text, I'll immediately be like, oh, how can I just fit this in? Oh, so yeah, it seems really complicated or weird, but it's actually just saying, I think that I find a lot of comfort from, but I'm trying to not do that and be like, okay, maybe it sort of resembles this. There's a kind of, there's a sameness here. There's some resemblance here, but where can I also look for the difference? I think we often look for what's same, how we can make these two things fit into the same category, rather than looking for how these things might be different. You know what I mean? And then, you know, when we find the difference in something, and we can't just assimilate it, then we are changing our representational networking here. When we allow that thing to be different, we're going to change in some way. I think, like with a relationship, I think is a great example. Like if you approach a friendship being like, well, I know who you are and I get you, and you couldn't say anything I don't already know, it's going to be a bad relationship. But if you approach a relationship like, I don't know you and I'm going to be confused and I'm going to be confounded, it'll be rich, and you yourself will change as well. That's the thing. I think that's the hallmark of like a good book for me, or a great book, quote unquote, is a book that changes me. And it's like I thought in this way before, and now I think differently, or I had these feelings about this thing before, and now it's different. There's some kind of rupture that occurs in me through allowing that thing to be other.
Totally. I really love that. So considering everything that we've talked about and also everything that you just generally think about the world, how do you view, the role that writing has and literature in general, but the act of writing? And I'd be interested to hear as well if you feel a difference about poetry writing or about nonfiction writing, because they are very, very different beasts. What do you think is the place of writing in our culture and in our society at the moment?
That's, I mean, I don't think I could answer that generally. The first thing that pops to mind is, I think it really depends who you are. I think it's just something I got at the moment with everything that's going on in the world, like genocide in Palestine, Iran, and in my own country in Australia, just increasingly authoritarian conditions in my own country. I'm kind of thinking, what the hell am I doing writing poems about walking to the shops? You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I get that.
Because for me, I mean, sure, like everything is political, but for me, especially poetry is not something. It's something I just do at a very selfish level. Or just, I just write about things that are emotionally resonant to me, and I don't think much beyond that. And again, I'm not sure. It's that thing. I don't know if these are necessarily poetic times. I think for someone, say, there's a lot of writing coming out of Gaza at the moment, for example, and writing by Palestinian Australians, and I'm like, yes, we need these stories because we need this witness, and we need to be centering these voices. But for myself, I'm I don't really know. I'm kind of wondering with this. I mean, I think always writing and art is a super important way of just staying sane. So in that way, I think it's something I'll keep doing because it makes me feel very grounded when I wake up in the morning and do a little journal and talk to myself about my feelings. Like it's a practice that's very important for me. But the place of literature in the world right now, and how it should be or can be shaped to respond to the world, or what's its place in the world, I really don't know. I'm tempted to say, like, put down your pen and like join your union, like go to a protest. Maybe this, at least for people like me, as a white Australian with an Anglo background, I don't necessarily know if the world needs my writing right now. I'm still going to do it, and if people want to read it and publish it, I'll be very honoured and thankful. But I think, maybe these aren't poetic times. Maybe these are times where there'll be times in my life, perhaps, when I'll be in a situation where I can write something and I feel a lot of integrity in what I'm writing, and I feel like I can contribute positively to the world with what I'm writing. That there will be junctures in my life, I'm sure, where that will happen, and there have been in the past where I've written things that feel important and feel like important, like interventions. But at the moment, it doesn't feel like that's really something. That's not what I need to be doing insofar as I want to have an effect on the world. I think it's more about more material things, I guess. But in general, writing, that's for me personally. In general, I think it's super important still to read, especially. Obviously, I'm biased because I love reading and I love writing, but I think increasingly, like, people we're just getting information. That thing I'm kind of critiquing in the piece, we're in this mode where we're just seeing words as information, and we're just downloading more and more information into our brains, which, again, nothing wrong with information, especially truthful information. But I think there's something that makes us just kind of better thinkers when we're actually reading and grappling and interpreting and getting mixed up and muddled up and grappling with language as a form on its own. I think that makes us more flexible thinkers. I think it makes us more creative thinkers, and I think it makes us better critical thinkers. So in that sense, I think reading is still important, but I'm not sure in the world we're in what place the writer has, especially a writer as privileged as myself. I don't know. Yeah.
Oh, I totally agree, which is why I like asking people that question, almost because I totally agree with you that I think the motto "put down your pen, go join a union" is very accurate. I think, and it almost feels like everybody's talking. Someone just be quiet. But then there's also this still a drive to write, and I think that's gotta be a good thing in some way, even though I can't really say how. So it's very interesting always to hear people's responses, and I totally agree with you.
Yeah, it's a very vexed question, isn't it? You get some people in the answer that writing is so powerful. It's totally exactly what we need for the political situation, and it's totally more important than ever, and everybody should be doing it. And there's other people who have given much more hesitant answers like you. So I think it's very interesting how nobody knows, which I think is good. It's kind of why we want to ask the question.
I think the question keeps demanding to be posed is exactly what we need.
Because people still do it, we still do it, and why is the question? What would you say? Why still do it? Is it purely an enjoyment? You said staying sane, or is there something inside you that feels like there is a point to it?
I mean, I think it's multiple things. I think at basic level, it's just enjoyable. It makes me feel alive, for want of a better term. Yeah. But at a second, I think if we're going to go to the thing of publishing, I think a lot of the reason why I seek to get my work published, if I'm being very honest with myself, is I want the status associated with that. But that coexists with I do deeply care about things outside of myself. I'm not a super cynical person, but yeah, it's very much like a kind of petty self-status thing at one level. But then again, coexisting with that, there is a thing that's just as real within me that feels as though there's things going on in the world that feel to me like they're wrong, or feel to me like they need to be addressed, or there are things that are nascent and are there but need to be supported and supported to flourish. And I see writing as a way to kind of participate in that kind of political struggle between the kind of world we're going to have or not have. And that's very real too. So I think it's a mixture of my better and lesser nature kind of coalescing around writing. Yeah. Well, it depends, like when I have my previous my ex, when we were falling in love, I was writing poems to kind of express love and to court. So I think it really depends on the situation, what I'm trying to do. It's not a very clean answer, but
no, it's a very difficult question to answer because writing is everything. Writing is so much of what we do, and reading is so much of what we do as humans that what's the point of producing a text? It could be to it could be anything. It could be a government form, or it could be a love poem, or it could be a political manifesto. So it could be but that's an arbitrary line to draw between literature and non-literature, I suppose. But so it is very slippery. Is I guess my point. But yeah, I guess I feel like writing is more powerful than some people think and less powerful than other people think. It's it does have an effect. It does. The culture is moved even a tiny little bit by somebody writing something, and living in a culture where kind of interesting philosophical, left-wing, poetic ideas are discussed and engaged with and written about makes us a better culture and has an effect on people's lives in the long term, I think. But it isn't going to start the revolution, and it isn't going to stop the genocide in Gaza. It isn't going to make anybody, not go hungry. certainly in the short term and perhaps in the long term. But it does do something, but it doesn't do, I don't know. It's tough, I think.
It needs to be integrated in that. Like, I think one of the pieces that I'm most like proud of, I guess, are pieces I've written about like my field of social work and disability, where I've seen things, and I'm integrated in those communities, and I'm integrated in that field and in that industry, and then the writing is kind of growing out of my participation in those material circumstances, if that makes sense. Whereas I think there's becoming this, I think that's where really powerful stuff comes from, when you have writers who aren't just writers in that aristocratic sense that they're just kind of separated, but when the writing is kind of growing out of deep engagement with the material circumstance, I think that's epic. And then it comes to feedback. You know what I mean? It causes this cycle between. It ceases to be this thing where there's material circumstance over here, go to a protest, and then over here, disconnected, you write your poetry. But rather, they kind of that symbolic work and that more, I suppose, physical work are happening together and almost feeding into each other, where the things you're writing are then feeding into the material circumstances and having an effect on them, which in turn, those changing material circumstances are in turn creating new forms of writing. I think that's kind of boss.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Oh, that's a very, very good point. It's a very good point.
That's true. Yeah.
There's only something I would like to publish more of in the magazine. It's like articles by people who are kind of writing about their area of expertise, more so like obviously kind of still creative, interesting, and not like but like I don't know. That would be really nice to have like somebody who is a social worker write some kind of perspective on social work, or somebody who's a lawyer write a perspective on the legal system, and so on. That would be really nice to publish. That would be the kind of thing that I would absolutely love to publish. But
yeah, because I feel like we all live kind of different lives and different careers, and there's things that are so obvious to someone who's in that world that is completely unknown and strange to someone else. And I guess interacting with that strangeness would be very nice and very enriching for everybody.
That's why I think it's really cool to have like different little publications as well that are rooted in different circumstances, because it's like like my engagement with the Australian mental health system is very specific to that system. Maybe there's some generalizations to be made there, but then having publications that are based in those areas, have a readership in those areas, it's like I think it testifies to the importance of having local, grassroots magazines like what you guys are doing, because you need situated pieces, but you also need situated readers and situated magazines to kind of bring it all together.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. Okay, amazing. I think we'll bring the chat to a close there. I'll say thank you very much, Nick. You've been a wonderful guest. This is really a wonderful piece. Books of Food, a manifesto on reading. You can read it at readingandaculture.com in our spring 2026 edition, where you can read a lot of other wonderful, wonderful pieces, and you really very much should. So thank you very much, Nick, and I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day. And goodbye. readingandaculture.com.
Bye.